In this video, I'll be showing you how to build this ruined castle terrain for D&D or other tabletop games. The castle was my entry to Idic Terrain Block competition in 2019. I began this project by cutting up a piece of 1/8 inch hardboard to act as a base. I wanted it to be 11 inches long to fit on the shelf where I had displayed it for over a year. I used permanent marker to draw my desired shape, then cut it out using various handsaws. I then took it over to my belt sander to clean up the edges and give them a bevel. This is how smooth it's looking, with the exception of that missing chunk that I will be applying some glue to. I then took some sprue, cut off some chunks, and cut those chunks into smaller bricks. The worst part about this process was that bits of sprue flew everywhere, and my hand operating the clippers became sore after a while. The original plan was for these bricks to make up a certain height of the wall and foam board would compose the rest. After a whole lot of this, I was left with way too many of these brick-sized sprue pieces. I made a tiny test base to ensure that my future plan wouldn't warp the board, and grabbed a long tin can to form the foundation of the castle's tower. I made a test piece of the wall pattern and used popsicle sticks to create the general shape of the tower. I had also glued down random bits of cardboard to my base to begin forming a hill of some kind. Next, I hot glued wet paper towels over that cardboard and coated it with white glue to help stiffen that up. To add texture to the hill, I sprinkled on a combination of sawdust, fine sand, dirt, tiny pebbles, and small rocks. After applying all that, here's what the base looks like. I used 4 2.5 pound weights to help prevent warping of the particle board. I then glued on my tin can with hot glue on an angle, which was intentional, and had previously roughed it up with cement and a rock to make sure that hot glue would adhere to it. My original plan was to make the walls wide enough for a tea light fire or a corpse on a rock, but I changed my mind. The figure that I'm using to act as a corpse is toy soldier size and larger than a 28mm miniature, so I had to make some modifications. I first cut off his stand, then sliced the knight in half to allow me to put guts between the pieces. He still seemed too tall, so I cut off another small chunk and used a gore pile I made as a reference to see what I want it to look like. I then primed the two halves of the knight black and began painting him. Lead Belcher formed the main color of both parts. While that dried, I began to work on the gate. For the arch shape and metal grate, I had recently bought some socks that came on that piece of plastic. It's about the right height, but way too long for the gate that I had in mind. For a while, I had attempted to work with this flimsy glued plastic arch, but eventually only used it as a stencil in foam board for the gate size. To form doors, I cut up chunks of popsicle sticks and glued on smaller popsicle sticks as supports, and glued on some miniature key rings from a rock tumbler jewelry set. I hot glued those on, then began to work on some random debris made out of junk and a spool thing. After gluing it together, it looks like a piece off a siege weapon. To finish off the knight that was started earlier, I painted a mixture of red and brown on the rock for blood. Next, I glued both halves on and used additional hot glue along with a piece of copper wire to form a spine. That got painted up with Bugman's Glow and red. The last external piece that I had worked on was this flaming debris pile. I glued some random junk onto a tea light and used stuffing from a teddy bear as smoke. I also spray painted the stuffing black like the Black Magic Craft tutorial told me to, and painted the debris as well. I measured out all the foam board that I wanted for the walls and cut out each piece. This included longer pieces for the tower. Before continuing the walls, I took some random junk and glued it on the base as more debris. I put together that broken section of wall and gave it a test fit. Next task, the tower. A HeroQuest door frame served as a template, which I cut out and glued more mini popsicle sticks to. A ballpoint pen helped create a textured arch in the foam board. Next, I took some 1/4-inch dowels and cut them to my needed height. I glued all 5 to different sections of my foam board to fill in the gaps of the pentagon. I took a lot of time to add rock texture with that pen, and glued the 4 sides together. The inside insert of that HeroQuest door template worked perfectly for a window, which I made look complete with a foam board overhang, toothpick bars, and foam board behind the cutout to make it appear dark inside. At this point, I had done a lot more work to glue the rest of the tower together, put on the broken wall, and piece together the still cracked but not demolished wall. I cut out a space for the gate, glued in the bars and the 2 broken gates on the ground, and also put random foam board chunks on the base. I did a ton more brickwork with a ballpoint pen, and glued on more debris like the paint cap and pile of skulls from the Citadel Skulls box. I love this orc skull on a crushed 22 casing as well. I also created the textured arch and impaled skull, and glued a toy saber-toothed tiger skull above that gate. More variation was added to the walls by adding random cracks. Pretty soon, I was going to put on bricks to conceal bottom gaps, but first I worked on the tower cap piece. You'll see more of it later, but it's the same shape as the tower. Out of my bits box, I pieced together this dead orc and threw a skull into his hand Shakespeare style. It's tower texturing time. I cut out a hole in the cap for the ladder and built a faux floor inside the tin can tower out of foam board and popsicle sticks. I painted that inside black, glued on the tower cap, threw a little sand inside that tower for a bit of texture, and also put on this flag. It came from a Warhammer Fantasy orc set.
What do you want?
More skulls were added, as well as a couple of those sprue bricks that I had cut up. At this point, the painting process began, starting with a coat of grey acrylic primer. Acrylic sprays don't melt foam, which is good. I put saran wrap on the red flag, but otherwise everything else was primed except for the pen marks. Then I painted the base brown, painted up the orc, and mixed up a grey paint for the walls. Some of the debris was made various colors depending on the material, and I cleaned the paint off these craft gems to make them look shiny again. I slapped some of these colors on to make the castle look more complete. Dark grey for the walls, light grey for the platforms and arches, silver bars and door handles, and wooden poles of the tower. More details were painted. Then I added a wash with watered down dollar store black paint, and at one point added a tree into the courtyard. Weights again prevented warping, and what I did at the end was add on different types of flocking for grass and moss. After all that, here is the completed project. I love this thing, and I like how it looks like it's been through an earthquake and a war. If you have any questions about exact dimensions or anything like that, please leave that in the comments below. Thank you everyone so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please do give me a like and a sub because that really helps me out. And I'll see you all in my next video. Goodbye!